after we learning the consequence from macro and micro point of view of the inflation, now we're going to learn how can we really measure the inflation. So we cannot just say this is inflation. So we have to use a certain method to measure currently the market has the inflation. So the measuring inflation actually serves two purposes. First, gauging the average rate of inflation. So we have to know, do we have inflation? And the second one actually is very important, is try to identify its principal victims and then try to help them out. So those are the purpose of to measure the inflation. So when we talk about measuring inflation, and we actually have so many different methods. So the first one is called Consumer Price Index, CPI. So you are pretty familiar with this short term CPI, but you might not know what that stands for. So it stands for Consumer Price Index. So it is a measure and it's an index of the average price of the consumer goods and the services. And so it is used to calculate the inflation rate. So it is used to calculate inflation rate. And so by observing the extent of the price increases, we can calculate inflation rate. So actually the inflation rate is the annual percentage rate of the income increase in the average price level. So this is the annual percentage rate of the income of the increase in the average price level. So we can see how inflation is measured by observing how the CPI is constructed. So when we're going to look at how the CPI are constructed, so the process begins with identifying a market basket of goods and services that consumers usually buy through surveys done by the Bureau of the Labor Statistics. And with the broad category of the expenditure, the Bureau of the Labor Statistics then itemize specific goods and services. In the last step, as a result of these surveys, we can calculate the average price of the market basket. So in practice, the CPI is usually expressed in terms of what the market basket costs in a specific base year. So now I have some new term, base year. So what's the base year? So this is the year used for comparative analysis. So the base for the index, for example, the price changes. So the effect of the specific price change on the inflation rate depends on the product's relative importance in the consumer budget. So the relative importance of the budget is reflected in system weights. So what is the item weight? So what is item weight? So this is the percentage of the total expenditure spent on the specific product used to computing inflation index. So this is the one CPI. So generally speaking, you need to decide what should put in the basket. And then second, you want to see which year should be our reference year. And later, all other year will be converted to that base year. And third, you have to pay attention is, since this is the index, it has to be always measured under the 100 scale. So this is the first one, which is our CPI. So the next one, we will do a little exercise before we move on to other possible way to calculate the inflation. So the formula we have here is the relationship between the price you are trying to measuring and the basket, the whole basket with the price average price. So the price index in current year divided by the price index in the base year, they should equal to the basket price in the current year over the basket price in the base year. So let's look at the example together. So we'll compute the CPI for the current year. So the current year will be $110. So the question is, do you agree with it? So a CPI of the 110 indicate that the price in the current year are 10% higher than the price in the base year. So this is going to be the answer. And one more practice. So in 2006, CPI was about 200. In 1983, the base year CPI was 100. So these two CPI figures tell us that the price doubled between 1983 and 2006. So in 1947, the CPI was about 50 cents, about 50. So the price doubled between 1947 and 1984. So if the good was priced at the $10 in 1974, what do you expect the price to be in 2006? So this will be our question. So first of all, you have to figure out what is the inflation rate. Then you can convert the price to the current price. So we will answer the question at the end of this chapter. So what's the answer for this? If the good was priced at $10 in 1974, what would you expect the price to be in 2006? So next, we will look at our next measurement to measure the inflation. So this is called the core inflation. So this measures the changes in CPI, excluding food and energy prices, which are volatile. So they exclude the most volatile price, but they are also a necessity for the daily life as well. So which means this index might not be the best. The next is called the PPI, Producer Price Index. It means the changes in the average price at the intermediate step of the production. So this is the second very popular measure to measure the CPI. Is called the PPI, Producer Price Index. And so the next we will discuss is called the GDP deflator. So the broadest price index is the GDP deflator, and the covers all outputs including consumer goods, investment goods, and government goods. And this deflator is a price index that refers to all goods and services impact the GDP. So unlike the CPI and the PPI, the GDP deflator is not based on the fixed basket of goods and services. So the CPI deflator is not a pure measure of the price changes, since its value reflects both price changes and the market responses. Thus, it usually registers a lower inflation rate than the CPI. So the next, we will do some exercise in terms of how to convert from getting our real GDP. So first, GDP deflator is used to adjust nominal output in value for changing price levels. So the nominal GDP will just introduce the definition. Here we try to see how can we get our inflation rate before we can get our current values. So in order to get inflation rate, this is the formula you have to use. So the CPI for the second year minus CPI on your base year, then divide by the CPI of your base year times 100, and then you will get the number for the money you're requesting. So in CPI in 2006 was $201.6 billion. So the CPI in 2005 was 195.3. So now we were asked to compute the inflation rate. So it's pretty straightforward. So the CPI year 2 will be 195.3 minus 201.6 and divide by 2.1 and 6 times 100. Then you will get your inflation rate. So you will get your inflation rate. So which is 3.23%. So if this is considered as a healthy goal, so we're actually going to discuss it in the next video.